Hello and welcome to Lesson 2. In Lesson 1, we analysed your audience. We looked at what do they need, where do they stand, how many are they, and what are their communication preferences. And this analysis helps you to decide how to deliver your presentation and what content to include. In this lesson, we will focus on how to structure that content. 3 reasons why structuring is important. First, it helps your audience to understand your message. Second is it makes you sound more credible. And third is it's easier for you to remember. So let's spend some time structuring your presentation. In this lesson, we'll cover 5 ways to help you remember your content, getting off to a great start, structuring simply, and wrapping to remember. So 5 ways to help you remember your content. And it's really helpful if you can remember your content because then you can focus on the audience. You're not in your head thinking about what should I say next, but you're focusing on the audience. And the audience is most important. So first, be interested in the topic. So if you can be interested in the topic that you're presenting about, it's much easier for you to remember what to say and also to be able to speak naturally. So think about something that you're interested in and imagine you're talking about that over a coffee with a friend. You don't need to prepare. You can talk very naturally, probably talk at length about that topic because it's something that you're interested in. And it's the same with presentations. So ideally you want to be talking about something that you are interested in. Now sometimes people say to me, well, in business I don't get to choose my topic, I have to talk about a certain topic. Well, in that case, think about what is it within that topic that's interesting for you and focus on that, emphasize that in your presentation. The more interested you are, the easier it is to remember your content. Number 2, create a simple structure. If you have a simple structure, it's easier for you to remember, and it's also easier for your audience to remember and understand what you're saying. We'll talk about structures a little bit more in a little while. Number 3, be human. So you don't need to really be so concerned about saying the exact words, being very, very scripted. Be human, just talk naturally, and it's okay if the words change a little bit from what you planned to say. People actually like to hear from humans rather than from machines. Number 4, use prompts if you need to. Prompts can help you feel a little bit more comfortable and help you then to remember your content. So one option is that you may have some key images or some keywords on your slides. Now I don't recommend that you rely heavily on your slides, but if you're struggling to remember, just having those images or keywords that help you to remember what the next point is that you want to make. That can be very helpful. Another option is to have note cards. And when you have note cards, you can just have them quite small to fit in your hand so that they're not big and distracting for the audience. If you have, for example, a big piece of A4 paper in your hand, that can be a little bit distracting for the audience, and it creates something of a barrier between you as the presenter and the audience. But small note cards are fine. And when you use those, if you use those, just be open and honest about it. Sometimes I see presenters who kind of want to sneakily look at those prompt cards and not want to admit that they're using them, but it's fine. As I said, be human. So have a look, check that where you are, where you want to be, know where you are, and continue with your presentation. And number 5 is practice. So this one is really important and very much overlooked. People sometimes think that if they practice a lot, they will become robotic, for example, in their presentation delivery. But that actually means that there's not been enough practice because you're still in the stage of trying to remember. You're in your head trying to remember your content. So you need more practice so that your content comes naturally to you and you can focus on the audience. It's especially important to practice the introduction to really get you off to a great start. So let's look at that next. Now, when you are presenting, it could be at a conference, a sales pitch, a team meeting, having that impact at the start really helps to get the audience's attention and helps you feel more confident as a presenter. So when audience members enter a conference or a meeting room, they've got questions in their head. For example, who is this speaker? What's the topic? What can I get from this presentation? Do I need to wait for a Q&A session at the end to ask questions? Will there be a break so that I can check my emails? All sorts of questions going on in people's minds, and it's difficult for them to focus without answers. So it's helpful if the presenter can answer some key questions right at the beginning of the presentation, and I'm talking especially in business presentations here. Those questions are the who, what, why, and how questions. So starting with, who are you? Introduce yourself briefly if the audience doesn't already know who you are, so that everyone knows who this presenter is and why they should listen to you. And you can start to build a connection and credibility. So, for example, if I'm presenting myself to an audience who doesn't know me, I might start with, I'm Helen Iwata, I'm British, and I've lived and worked in Japan for 25 years. My mission is to help people create communication habits for success and happiness in global business. Now, what I say there, I would tailor depending on who my audience is and what the content of the presentation is. Now, if someone's introducing you in a more formal presentation, you don't need to repeat your name. Even though in Japanese it's common to say "Tadaima go shoukai ni yasukarimashita" and then continue with your name again, you don't need to do that in English. What are you going to talk about? So sometimes you may think it's obvious, but it may not be fully obvious to your audience. So tell them up front what your topic is very clearly, so that you don't have misunderstandings, misinterpretations or frustration in the audience. Then why should the audience listen? What is the audience going to get out of listening to your presentation? So let me give you some examples here, and this is really, really important to think from the audience's perspective. So I might say, if I'm talking about this particular presentation, well, why is it important to get off to a great start? It helps you to get your audience's attention, they'll find you more credible, which helps you to be more persuasive, and you'll feel better if things go well from the outset. Or, for example, I might be giving this kind of why in my introduction in a business presentation. By the end of this 30-minute presentation, I hope you'll understand the full benefits of this new product and have the information that you need to decide whether or not to invest in it. Or you might form the why in a question. For example, what impact would having more information about this topic have on your business? So here you ask them why it's important that they listen. And in this case, the audience thinks and answers the question so that it becomes more relevant and the audience has more interest in the topic. So it's about why the audience should listen to you. This is not about why you are giving the presentation. For example, you might say that your why is I'm giving this presentation to get your buy-in on the new project. But that's for you as a presenter and not as the audience. So think from the audience's perspective. And how are you going to proceed? So there are 5 items that you might cover in the how part. These are the agenda. And the agenda is talking about what are the main topics that you plan to cover in your presentation. So you might say, I'd like to cover 3 topics in this presentation, A, B, and C. For the timing, you give your audience a sense of maybe how long you're going to spend on each topic if it's quite a long presentation, and also how long the presentation is in total. So you might say, I'll take around 10 minutes for each topic, totaling 30 minutes. Then questions. So let the audience know whether they can ask you questions at any time or whether they need to wait for the Q&A. For example, you might say, I plan to leave 10 minutes for questions at the end, so I'd appreciate it if you could hold your questions until then. Or you might say, I'm happy to take questions at any time during the presentation. Make it clear to the audience so they know what to do and they don't have those doubts in their mind that stops them from concentrating on what you're saying. Handouts. So if you're using handouts, let the audience know. You might, for example, say, please check that you have the handout. Or you might say there are more handouts available by the door. Or you may choose to give handouts at the end of your presentation so that people are not looking through the handout but are focusing on what you're saying. And you can let them know, I'll be giving you some handouts at the end. Or handouts will be available to download after the presentation or after the conference. Then breaks. Let the audience know what they can expect in terms of breaks if it's a long presentation. So you may say, we'll take a 15-minute break around halfway through the presentation. You might say, please help yourself to coffee or water. Now, a moderator may cover some or all of these points if you have one, especially in a conference situation, but if not, it's best if you can cover the relevant points for your presentation so that the audience knows how you're going to proceed and the audience can focus. Now, answering those 4 questions around the who, what, why, and how appeals to the logical part of the brain, but it may not be enough to stimulate the emotional part of the brain. By learning techniques to get an emotional reaction from your audience, you can get people's attention, create a connection, and have impact with your presentation. And I call this part of getting off to a great start the wow. To make it easier to remember and use the techniques, I put them into 3 categories: show, say, and do. So the show is what the presenter shows. This could be, for example, video clips. It could be images such as photos, pictures, diagrams. It could be objects, new products. You could do a competitor comparison. You could show some equipment. Or it's say, what the presenter says. This could be a story about the presenter themselves. It could be a related story, using words that resonate, or using questions. And the do, what the audience does. So this is that you ask them to write something down. You maybe invite them to discuss an issue in pairs or groups or come up with ideas. Or maybe there's some sort of a standing activity. And you can add your own ideas to this list. There's no need to worry about exactly which category a technique is in. The categorization of show, say, and do is really just to help you, give you some ideas for the types of techniques that you can use. And these types of techniques can create a deeper connection than words alone and appeal to the older emotional part of the brain. they make your presentation more memorable. So we've spoken about how to get off to a great start. Now we get into the body of your presentation, and I really encourage to have a simple structure for the body of your presentation. If you can't remember your own presentation, how can you expect the audience to remember it? So I'd like to introduce two types of structure that I find very useful in business presentations. There are, of course, many different types of structure, but let's just focus on these two because I think they can be very widely used. First of all, a pyramid. Now, I'm not talking here about the Barbara Minto pyramid principle. What I'm talking here is something simple. It's different from that pyramid principle. So I want to be clear about that. The pyramid is when you have the main message of what you want to say at the top, and it's supported, for example, by 3 or 2 or 4 or 5 points. Doesn't have to definitely be 3, but 3 is a common number that it makes you sound more credible if you can talk about 3 points, and it's relatively easy to remember. So, for example, if I were giving a presentation, I'm talking about this particular course, Prepare Your Presentation in 30 Days. And I could structure it in this way. I could give the message, this course combines the best of technology and the personal touch. I could support that with my first point of saying, this is something that you can do anytime, anywhere. My second point could be around, you can get advice, you can get feedback, you can get instruction from the trainer directly. And my third point could be that you can get input from the other participants on the course. And then as I develop my presentation, I would talk about each of those supporting points in more detail. So all of those support my main message about this course being something that brings the best of technology with the personal touch. So that's a pyramid type of structure. Now, you don't necessarily need to lead with the conclusion about your presentation. You can actually talk about those supporting points and then get to your conclusion, which often is very useful with audiences. For example, Japanese audience often like the Kisho Tenketsu type of structure of hearing the background before getting to the conclusion. And that's also what we often find in a story type of structure. So here you start off with a situation, there's some kind of difficulty, there's an outcome, and that creates your message. So using the same idea of the Prepare Your Presentation in 30 Days course, I might introduce it in this way. So for the situation, you need to prepare a big presentation. You've got an important presentation coming up. The difficulty, though, is that you are really busy at work and you just don't have the time to focus and prepare. And you're also not sure how to structure your presentation or how to deliver your presentation in the most effective way. So, what you can do in this situation is take the Prepare Your Presentation in 30 Days course, and that will help you in 30 days to take those steps that you need to take to learn the skills that you need to learn to be able to deliver a fantastic presentation. So the message is take the course. And this is great because you're already doing it, so wonderful. Well done with that. Now, once you've gone through your body, you have the wrap. The wrapping to remember. It's good to conclude with this kind of structure because the audience remembers most what they hear at the beginning and what they hear at the end. And if you're strong in both of these areas, it can help them to remember your presentation overall. So I recommend that you start with a recap of talking about what it is that you've covered in your presentation. And you can make this as short or as long as you like, but reasonably short so that it goes in and people can remember what you're saying. Also, Follow that with a call to action. What do you want the people to do differently? What do you want them to think differently as a result of your presentation? You might then have some time for a Q&A, and if you do that, then add in your call to action one more time just to really help people remember. And close with appreciation. So now I'm going to do a wrap to remember, and this is my recap. In this lesson, we covered 5 ways to help you remember your content. We talked about getting off to a great start using the who, what, why, how, and wow structure. We also looked at structuring simply for the body of your presentation, the pyramid structure and the story structure. And we talked about wrapping to remember. And that leads me into my call to action, which is your next steps. So next steps, go through the Lesson 2 workbook, complete the simple structure template. So I've just done my recap, I've just done my call to action. So in the wrapping to remember, the final part is for me to say thank you.